I am Marissa Greer, 31 years old woman. I'm a senior compliance officer at a mid-sized credit union in Sacramento, California. 6 months ago, I discovered my sister had taken $460,000 from our family trust, and what I did next changed everything. The email came on a Monday morning. I was sipping lukewarm coffee from the chipped World's Okayest Sister mug Sydney had given me 5 years ago, the kind of gag gift you toss in your bag after Christmas and only find again during spring cleaning. I kept it anyway. Irony, maybe. When I saw the subject line, urgent, suspicious activity on Greer Family Trust, my stomach dropped, not because it was unexpected, but because it was. I had a feeling something was off for weeks. Dad had been gone barely a year. Mom passed less than 3 months after him, and like everything else, the paperwork fell to me. I was the executor, the organized one, the one with the color-coded Google Drive folders and legalese Google alerts. Sydney, my little sister by 3 years, was listed as co-beneficiary. I wanted to believe that meant we walk through it together, two sisters, equal, cooperative, maybe even healing. Instead, the numbers told a different story. The trust had been structured in disbursement phases, 1/3 upfront, 1/3 in 6 months, and 1/3 in 1 year, pending quarterly reports. That first third, $460,000 her share. And it was gone. Not just allocated, not invested, gone. The itemized list from the fiduciary services firm read like a fever dream. $83,000 wire to a luxury furniture reseller. $36,000 in crypto transactions across 4 exchanges. $9,200 to a cosmetic clinic in Los Angeles. $4,600 on an NFT art marketplace. $700 at what appeared to be a psychic hotline. I blinked, closed the document, reopened it. Same numbers. I clicked back to the bank statements, then the fiduciary interface, searching for anything that would suggest an error, a misfile, a typo. But it was all her. Sydney. My sister. And just like that, the air in my apartment changed. Not colder, just thinner, like the oxygen had been replaced with disbelief. I called her straight to voicemail. I called again and again. Nothing. On the 4th try, I left a message. Hey Sid, I saw something, please call me, we need to talk about the trust. I didn't yell, I didn't accuse, not yet. Instead, I sat on the couch, pulled my legs up under me, and stared at our last text thread. 2 weeks ago. Sydney, do you remember the banana bread Mom used to make on snow days? Me, yeah, it had walnuts and that weird crunchy sugar. Sydney, I found the recipe, might try it this weekend. Me, take pics, send me one. There were no pictures. Just silence. 2 days passed before she finally answered. Her voice was airy, light, too casual. Hey, sorry, I've been down in Carmel with Jax, no service at the cabin. Carmel with Jax. Her boyfriend who flipped properties and ideas with equal volatility. The kind of man who used phrases like monetize your mindset and once gave her a framed Bitcoin quote for Valentine's Day. Sid, I said, calm but clipped, I need to talk to you about the trust. A pause. Long enough to tell me she knew. What about it? She said too flatly. I saw the withdrawals, all of them, over $400,000. Another pause. Sydney. Then her voice cracked. It wasn't all me, Jax. He convinced me it was temporary, we were going to reinvest it, double it. I stood up, packing. You liquidated inheritance assets to gamble in crypto and filler injections. It wasn't gambling, she snapped. It was a strategy, we got unlucky. I took a breath. You committed fraud, Sydney. The trust has usage conditions. I didn't mean to. That doesn't matter anymore. Silence. Then softly, so what are you gonna do, sue me? I don't know yet, I said, but I've already spoken to the trust lawyer, I'm filing a freeze request. A gasp, not loud, more like a sharp inhale, barely contained. You're freezing my accounts. I don't have a choice. Yes, you do, she cried. You're choosing to humiliate me instead of helping me. No, I said quietly, I'm choosing to stop you before there's nothing left. She hung up. I stared at the phone like it might ring again. It didn't. The freeze was approved 3 days later. I submitted everything: the forensic audit, the bank activity, the text logs. Logan, our family's trust attorney, called it a clean slam dunk. But there was nothing clean about it. That weekend, I drove by her apartment. I didn't go inside. I just sat across the street watching her balcony. There were clothes draped over the railing, an overturned planter, and a for sale sign on her Jeep parked below. She was unraveling, and I had pulled the final thread. Part of me wanted to get out of the car, to climb the stairs and hold her the way I used to when we were kids and she'd sob through storms, convinced lightning would find her first. But this wasn't a storm I could shield her from. She made the choices, and now we both had to live with the consequences. A week later, I got a call from a hospital. She'd collapsed at a gym, severely dehydrated, and refused to let anyone notify family. But one nurse found my number under ice in her phone. I went, sat in the hallway outside her room for 6 hours while she slept under white sheets with an IV dripping slowly into her arm. When she woke, she didn't look surprised. Or even angry. Just tired. "You're not supposed to be here," she whispered. "I know," I replied, "but I came anyway." She turned away, her voice barely audible. "I think I'm sick, Riss." I reached for her hand. And I didn't let go. Not then. Not even after everything she'd done. Because I still remembered the little girl who used to cry during storms. And this was the worst one yet. She was discharged 3 days later, against medical advice. I had begged the attending doctor to keep her longer, just long enough to get a psychiatric evaluation or at least a supervised detox from whatever financial frenzy she'd spiraled into. But they couldn't hold her. Her vitals were stable, her answers coherent. And so she walked out in a gray hoodie and borrowed jeans, her phone in one hand and her shame in the other. I drove her home, not to her apartment she had lost the lease 2 weeks before, to mine. The silence in the car was the loudest thing either of us said that day. She sat with her arms wrapped tight around her body, staring out the window as if the landscape could distract her from the slow, bleeding consequences that kept following us. The only time she spoke was when we pulled into the underground parking of my building. "I won't stay long." "I didn't ask you to leave," I replied. Upstairs, I had already set out a blanket, a pillow, and a spare toothbrush on the couch. I knew she'd hate the gesture, too prepared, too neat, too much like the old Marissa who anticipated everyone's disasters and softened the landing. But she didn't complain. She just dropped her duffel bag to the floor and curled up with her back to me. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan, listening to her soft, intermittent breathing, wondering how we got here, wondering who we were before money became a language we couldn't speak to each other anymore. The next morning, I called Logan. "Is there any way to revise the trust terms?" I asked him. He paused. "You want to change them?" "Yeah, to include repayment conditions, recovery oversight, accountability milestones." He sighed. "We can try, but you know Sydney has to agree." I knew. And she was unpredictable on her best days. When I presented it to her, she stared at me from across the table, her hair unwashed, her skin pale but resolute. "You're rewriting the trust?" she asked. "I'm not punishing you," I said. "I'm protecting both of us. If you sign these revisions, the freeze stays in place, but you get structure, a chance to prove you can earn back access. Not just money, trust." She didn't speak for a long time. "Then what if I say no?" "Then the freeze remains permanent, and the trust is sealed until the 1-year clause runs out." She laughed, dry and bitter. "You've always been better at contracts than comfort. And you've always chosen chaos over clarity," I snapped before I could stop myself. She stood, eyes blazing. "Do you think I wanted this? That I planned to implode? I was drowning, Marissa. And every time I looked at you, all I saw was someone who knew how to swim and chose not to save me." I swallowed, heart pounding. "I was swimming in grief too," I said. "I just didn't scream while I did it." That shut her up. She sat down, crumpling slightly like a balloon losing air. "I'm tired," she whispered. "So am I." She stared at the pages again. "I'll sign it, but I need something in return." I raised an eyebrow. "What?" Let me help decide how it's enforced. I blinked. You want to co-write your own boundaries. She nodded. If I'm going to rebuild my life inside this box, I want to help shape it. Against every instinct I had, I agreed. We sat side by side at my kitchen counter, redrafting the clause conditions. We added a clause for voluntary therapy, a requirement that she submit monthly expense logs, and her suggestion, a quarterly sit-down with me and Logan to review progress. She even asked to include a clause that if she backslid twice, she'd forfeit her next installment permanently. That's harsh, I said. She shrugged, but fair. The final version was notarized 2 weeks later. Logan called it a highly unusual but promising arrangement. Sydney called it a leash made of lace. But I saw it for what it was, the first real sign that she wanted to change. The trust was now more than a document. It was a map. And she had just taken her first step. One night, weeks later, I found her on my couch, wide awake at 3 a.m., staring at a spreadsheet she'd made in Excel. A budget. A real one, color-coded and organized by category. Who are you? I joked. She smiled faintly, someone who's finally trying. And then softly, do you think Mom would be proud? I walked over, knelt beside her, and said the thing I hadn't dared believe until that moment. I think she already is. Sydney exhaled shakily, and for the first time since this all began, I saw her shoulders loosen, not from surrender, but from relief. Because she knew now that I wasn't just guarding the money. I was guarding her. And she was finally letting me. 3 months after the freeze, the anger softened. Not disappeared, but dulled like a fever breaking, leaving behind only the cold sweat of what you'd almost lost. Sydney had found her footing, at least enough to return to part-time work. She was still staying with me, still following the conditions of the trust restructure, still attending her therapy sessions every Thursday evening. Her notebooks were now full of goal tracking and emotional reflections instead of doodled daydreams and vague affirmations. But even as progress showed up on paper, I still carried a knot in my chest that refused to unravel. That knot broke loose when I received the letter. It arrived on a foggy Tuesday morning. I remember because I was running late, spilled oatmeal on my blouse, couldn't find my car keys, traffic a nightmare. The envelope was in the mailbox, tucked between a dental bill and a Pottery Barn catalog. It was wax-sealed, hand-addressed, no return label. I thought it was spam until I opened it and read the letterhead. John F. Trennan, attorney at law, estate services. My parents' old lawyer. We hadn't used him for the trust. After Dad passed, I'd moved everything over to Logan. John was semi-retired and living part-time in Maui by then. The note inside was short-clipped. As per the posthumous delivery request of Arthur Greer, this is to be opened by Marissa Greer no sooner than 6 months following the final burial of Arthur and Evelyn Greer, per the explicit instructions of the deceased. My breath caught. Beneath the note was another envelope, yellowed at the edges, my father's handwriting. I didn't open it at the mailbox. I didn't open it in the elevator. I didn't even open it at my kitchen counter where I opened every other envelope in my adult life. I went into my bedroom, closed the door, sat cross-legged on the bed. And finally, with trembling hands, I broke the seal. Inside was 1 page, lined paper, ink slightly faded, like he'd written it with the last working pen in a drawer that hadn't been touched since tax season. Marissa, if you're reading this, it means the 6-month window has passed. That was intentional. I wanted this to arrive after the fog of grief, after the anger, after the silence. There's something we never told you. Sydney's diagnosis came when she was 19. Bipolar II. She had a severe episode in her sophomore year and we admitted her to inpatient care. She stayed 10 days, refused medication afterward. Your mother and I tried everything, therapy, coaches, new environments. And then we tried silence, not out of fear, but out of hope. We wanted to believe she would grow out of the volatility, that maturity would equal stability, but she never fully leveled. We didn't tell you because you were already the strong one. You were paying your own tuition, working nights, organizing your future like it was a war plan. We couldn't bring you that weight. But maybe that was wrong. Maybe you needed to know. Not so you could protect her, but so you could protect yourself. I love you. I believe in you. And I'm sorry we gave you more duty than truth. Love, Dad. The room blurred, not from tears, not at first, but from the rush of memory. Her manic laughter that night. She painted her bedroom wall jet black and called it mood reinforcement. The spontaneous trip she planned to Oregon with a man she'd met online 3 days earlier. The crash when she disappeared for a week, resurfacing in a motel with no recollection of how she got there. We'd always called her like you. Why didn't you ever tell me? Because I didn't want to become my diagnosis, and because they asked me not to. I closed my eyes. Of course they did. Did Jax know? I asked. She hesitated. He guessed, said I was just sensitive, said it made me more passionate. He liked the highs, disappeared during the lows. I wanted to throw something, but I didn't. Instead, I asked, are you medicated now? She nodded. Just started. It's not perfect, but it's quiet in my head for the first time in years. That night I sat at my desk, rereading the letter again and again. And for the first time since the account freeze, I didn't feel like I was battling my sister. I felt like I was meeting her. Truly. Maybe for the first time. Sydney started keeping a journal. Not a private one like the marble-bound diary she used to shove under her mattress in high school. This one was different. It sat open on the coffee table in full view, pages dog-eared and smudged with pen. At the top of every page she wrote the date. Underneath, debits plus credits, emotional edition. It started as a joke, I think, an attempt to meet me halfway, her emotionally chaotic world colliding with my clinical spreadsheet mind. But over time it became something else. A confessional, a logbook, a place where she tracked not just her spending but her honesty. Credit, apologized to Marissa for snapping over the almond milk thing. Debit, still haven't called Dr. Lansing back. Credit, did laundry, realized I own more bath towels than pairs of pants. Debit, snapped at bank rep when she asked for my last 4 SSN digits. Regret scale, 8-10. At first I skimmed it with a mix of curiosity and discomfort. Then, slowly, I began to look forward to it. The entries read like tiny windows into her rebuilding, raw, funny, heartbreaking. The day she wrote. Credit didn't lie once, all day. I cried in the bathroom for 10 minutes straight. Because I knew exactly how hard that was for her. We started leaving notes for each other in the margins. I'd underline something and write, proud of you. She'd circle something and scrawl, still owe you an almond milk. One Sunday, I flipped to the last page and found a list titled, Things I Would Do Differently If I Had the $460K Back. It wasn't a fantasy wish list. It was brutally honest. 1. Pay off Aunt Jen's mortgage. 2. Hire a real CPA instead of trusting YouTube. 3. Buy Mom's locket back from that awful pawn shop in Roseville. 4. Therapy 3 times a week, no excuses. 5. Set up a scholarship in Dad's name. There were 20 items in total. But it was number 6 that shattered me. 6. Tell Marissa the truth before she had to find it herself. That night I closed the journal and made a decision. I was going to give her something back. Not the money that was gone, and it wasn't mine to resurrect. But I had something else, a way to unfreeze her from the inside out. I drove to my office early Monday morning and requested a meeting with Logan. When he arrived, I handed him a sealed folder. Inside was a proposed amendment to the trust terms, an early release clause. If Sydney met 6 consecutive months of recovery benchmarks, including counseling, stable employment, financial mentorship sessions, and zero legal infractions, she would be eligible to unlock 10% of her remaining portion for supervised use. No wire transfers, no crypto gambles, just a trust-controlled debit account with capped daily spending. Logan reviewed the documents, raised an eyebrow. "You sure about this?" "I'm sure she needs this," I replied. Trust isn't about perfection, Logan. It's about letting someone grow inside your belief in them. He leaned back in his chair. "You're not the same woman who walked into my office with fire in her eyes and a spreadsheet of forensic flags." "I'm not," I agreed. "But Sydney's not the same woman who drained a family legacy into Jax's vision board, either." He nodded. "I'll draft it." Back home, I told her that night. She didn't cry. She didn't cheer. She just blinked slowly, absorbing it like it was too fragile to touch. "Why?" she whispered. "Because you've earned more than restrictions." She nodded, then covered her face with her hands. "I still hate myself some days," she said, muffled. "I hate that I lied, that I let Jax manipulate me, that I couldn't even face you when it all collapsed." "I know," I replied, "but I'd rather walk forward with you through that hate than backward into silence." She pulled her hands away, red-eyed raw. "Can I tell you something stupid?" "Always." "I thought the money would fix me." I didn't say anything. She looked away. Turns out the losing of it did. The next day, she wrote a journal entry I'll never forget. It just said, "Today I was trusted not because I'm fixed, but because I'm still trying." And that somehow was the greatest credit either of us had ever earned. It was a routine Tuesday when the confession happened. Sydney had just hit month 4 on her recovery track. Her therapist had signed off on another milestone. She was holding down a job as an admin assistant at a nonprofit that helped women transition out of incarceration. There was a rhythm to her days now: wake up, walk Pepper, our building's aging pug that Sydney somehow claimed partial custody over, log receipts, go to work, come home, update her emotional ledger. She was doing well, we were doing well. That's what made her confession feel like such a rupture. We were in the middle of dinner, leftover lentil soup and toasted pita. She was half laughing about a misprinted brochure at her office that accidentally listed life coaching as life choking when she stopped mid-sentence. Her spoon froze just inches from her mouth. "Riss," she said, voice tightening, "there's something I have to tell you, and you're not going to like it." I looked up, immediately bracing. "What is it?" She set the spoon down, pressed both palms to the table. "It wasn't just Jax. The withdrawal, the big one, the initial $190,000. I waited. I told you it was a crypto idea he had, that I agreed to transfer it, that it was dumb, and it was, but I didn't tell you, I didn't just transfer it." My stomach coiled. "I forged your approval," she said flatly. The words cracked the air like a whip. I blinked. "What?" Her voice dropped. "You remember that quarterly approval form you were supposed to co-sign, the one from the financial advisor's office?" I nodded slowly, cold creeping into my limbs. "I got a PDF version, used an editing app, dropped your signature in." She looked up, eyes full of shame. "I made it look real. The fiduciary released the funds because they thought you approved it." My breath caught. That explained the missing audit trail, the accelerated release, the notes from the trust monitor that all parties had cleared the disbursement. "I lied to them," she whispered, "and I lied to you again." For a moment I said nothing. I didn't trust myself. Then I stood up, walked away from the table, into the kitchen. I leaned against the sink, staring at the empty mug from that morning, heart hammering. It wasn't just recklessness. It was fraud. Against me. "Why are you telling me now?" I finally asked, my voice hoarse. She walked to the threshold between the kitchen and living room and didn't cross it. "Because I'm tired of rebuilding something I'm still lying inside of," she said, "and because the guilt's eating me more than the freeze ever did." I turned around. Her arms were limp at her sides, mouth trembling. "I won't fight you if you change the terms again," she added. "If you cut me out fully, I'll understand." I stared at her. Then quietly, "You signed a legal document with a clause for backsliding." "I know." I picked up my phone. Opened the trust agreement in my saved files. Found the clause, 2 violations of compliance or honesty will trigger full disqualification from further disbursement unless appeal is filed and granted. She had just triggered the second. I walked back toward her and held out the phone. This is your signature, I said, on the line that says you wouldn't do this. She looked down. I know. You violated it. I know. So why should I give you another chance? She looked at me, broken and brave and fully exposed. Because I'm telling you before the next withdrawal, because I didn't wait to get caught, because for once in my life I chose the truth, even if it costs me everything. And then she did something I never expected. She took out an envelope and handed it to me. Inside was a notarized letter, a voluntary waiver. It read, I, Sidney Lee Greer, acknowledge breach of the conditions laid out in the amended trust agreement dated March 18. I waive all rights to future disbursements and agree to forfeit remaining inheritance shares. This decision is made without coercion, out of respect for the process, and for the relationship I have already damaged more than once. I looked at her stunned. I wrote it a month ago, she said, just in case, because I knew I might break again and I didn't want to drag you down with me. Tears blurred my vision. You were planning to give this to me. If I slipped, which I just did. And I realized this was growth, actual growth. Not perfection. Not redemption in a montage. But the real, messy kind where a person admits their darkest turn and still chooses to hand over the flashlight. I folded the waiver carefully, set it on the table. Then I walked over, pulled her into a hug, and whispered, we're going to rewrite the terms again, but this time together. We didn't speak for the rest of the night. Not out of anger, not even shock, just gravity. Like the air between us had grown too thick for small talk, too sacred for anything but silence. I left her waiver on the dining table untouched. She didn't touch it either. The next morning, I found her sitting cross-legged in the hallway between our rooms, as if she'd walked toward mine in the dark but lost the courage to knock. The journal lay in her lap. A new page. Debit broke the trust again, told the truth, waited for it to end, it didn't. That last line made my chest cave in. Because she was right, it hadn't ended. And the truth was, I didn't want it to. I knelt beside her, reached for her hand. We need to write a new clause. She nodded slowly, tearfully, with a third strike policy. No, I said, with a recovery clause that acknowledges relapse is part of healing. She looked stunned. You'd still give me access after all of this. Not access, structure, hope, boundaries with breath. For the next week, we rebuilt everything, not just the financial scaffolding, but the emotional one too. We called it the room without locks clause, a section of the trust terms that created a buffer zone. A place where a breach wouldn't mean exile, but reflection. A 3-month grace period where future violations could be disclosed, analyzed, and corrected through counseling and fiduciary supervision before disbursements were permanently cut. It was radical. And Logan was wary. I've seen this backfire, he warned. Some people weaponize leniency. I know, I said, but some people weaponize perfection, and that's not justice either. We signed the new terms on a Thursday. By Friday, Sydney had enrolled in an intensive financial trauma workshop. It wasn't mandatory, she found it on her own. That was the part that stunned me most. She wasn't being compliant anymore. She was being curious. A month later, she paid back $3,000, the first installment of a voluntary restitution plan we hadn't even asked for. She called it her truth tax. Every time I give something back, she said, it feels like I'm buying pieces of my soul I sold off years ago. I didn't know what to say to that. So I just hugged her. Some nights we'd sit in the living room together, watching reruns of game shows and folding laundry. It was the most ordinary intimacy, and maybe that's what made it feel miraculous. One night she turned to me and said, "Do you remember when we used to play bank?" I laughed. Yeah, you'd steal Monopoly money from my pile and call it a loan with vibes. She grinned, and you'd arrest me and make me sit in the hallway with a shoebox labeled Trust Jail. That sounds about right. Do you ever miss those days? I shrugged. I miss the simplicity, but not the silence. She nodded. We didn't know how to talk then about anything real. We're doing better now. Yeah, she whispered, we are. That weekend, she surprised me with a visit to our childhood home. It had been vacant since our parents passed. I'd kept the property but never had the heart to walk through it again. She held out the key. I called the caretaker, she said, thought maybe we could go together, start over somewhere old. I didn't answer. I just took the key and followed her into the past. The front door creaked open like it had been holding its breath. Everything smelled like lemon cleaner and memory. There were still faint dents in the hallway where we used to race scooters. The scratch marks in the molding where Sydney measured our heights with a Sharpie she wasn't supposed to use. We wandered from room to room like museum curators of a life we used to live. In the kitchen, Sydney ran her hand over the old counter and said, if I could turn back time, I'd sit right here and tell you about the diagnosis. I leaned against the fridge, and I'd probably say something logical and kind but still find a way to judge you. She smiled faintly. We both would have messed it up. Yeah, I said, but we're here now. We stood there in silence, the ghosts of our younger selves peeking out from corners. Then, without warning, Sydney reached into her pocket and pulled out a slip of paper. It was a check. $10,000 made out to the trust account. For what? I asked. For everything, she said. I know it's just a fraction, but it's a beginning. I looked at her, this woman who had once forged my name and drained our legacy, and I saw not a debtor, but a sister. Still trying. Still showing up. Still standing in the ruins of our inheritance, trying to build something livable from the wreckage. A room without locks. And somehow, after everything, that felt like home. The idea came to me while standing in line at the DMV, which honestly should be an Olympic event for patience and perspective. I was thumbing through emails on my phone, bored and half-starving, when I opened one from a foundation I'd forgotten I even subscribed to, the Aloan Fund, a grant program for women-led community impact initiatives. I'd looked into it briefly years ago, back when I still fantasized about starting a financial education nonprofit for young women. I never applied. Too busy, too tired, too safe. But now, reading the subject line, applications now open for 2025 seed round, something sparked. What if Sydney and I built something together? Not a business. A restoration. A way to give away what we'd almost destroyed. That night over Thai takeout, I brought it up. She blinked, chopsticks midair. You want us to apply for a grant? I know it sounds crazy. It sounds ambitious and terrifying, but mostly kind of brilliant. We stayed up until 2 a.m. outlining a rough proposal. The Trust Table, a mentorship program for women healing from financial betrayal. It wasn't just about money. It was about the emotional residue left behind after being stolen from, lied to, or left out of family legacies. The shame, the silence, the urge to become small and safe and never ask for anything again. We wrote about our story, pieces of it, and how we'd rebuilt something out of the ashes. We proposed weekly support circles, financial therapy workshops, guest speakers, a microgrant program for those needing a fresh start, not $460,000, but maybe enough to move out, pay off a credit card, or hire a divorce attorney. We submitted the application 3 days before the deadline. Then we waited. And waited. The day we got the email, Sydney was on the couch with a migraine and I was stress cleaning the fridge. The chime on my phone made me drop a bottle of almond milk. She sat up. What is it? I stared at the screen. Congratulations, your proposal has been selected for a $25,000 seed grant. I read it out loud twice before it felt real. Sydney shrieked. I laughed, full-bodied and breathless. We jumped up and down like kids. Pepper barked like we'd set off an alarm. It was one of those rare, crystalline moments in adulthood where joy feels clean. We didn't just win money. We were being seen. Later that week, we visited the foundation's downtown office to meet with a program advisor. A polished woman in her early 50s named Erica, with the kind of warmth that made you forget you were technically being evaluated. We were really moved by your transparency, she said. Especially the part where you described the inheritance breach and how it became a turning point. Sydney shifted beside me. I almost told her to leave that part out, she said, but then I realized that was the story. Erica smiled. You'd be surprised how many women carry secret financial traumas, betrayals, abandonments. Yours just happened to come with a dollar sign and a paper trail. We left that meeting lighter. More real. More ready. Over the next month, our apartment transformed into a planning bunker. Post-its on every wall. Calendars scribbled with program dates. A whiteboard Sydney rescued from a dumpster labeled things we wish someone had told us at 23. And somewhere between booking venues and building spreadsheets, I realized something. We weren't just repairing our relationship. We were rethreading our identities. Sydney wasn't the mess. She was the mentor now, the woman writing recovery curriculum while sipping chamomile tea. And me. I was finally using my control for something bigger than protection. I was using it to plant. We launched the trust table on a sunny Saturday in April. 30 women showed up, some in tears, some in skepticism, all of them carrying stories with invisible scars. We opened with a circle. Sydney went first. She didn't recite her resume, she didn't hide. She said, "Hi, I'm Sydney, and I once stole almost $500,000 from my own blood, but today she's still sitting beside me, so I guess love, real love, can survive anything." The room went still. Then someone clapped. Then another. And then the whole room was applauding, not because she was perfect, but because she was present. That night we sat on our balcony, the air crisp with early spring and late gratitude. "I don't know how we got here," she said softly. "We walked," I said, "sometimes crawled, but we never stopped moving." She smiled. "Think Dad would be proud." I looked up at the stars. "I think he already is." It had been 5 months since the trust table launched when I saw him again. Jags. He was standing in the back of the community center gym, arms folded, leaning against the wall like he belonged anywhere but there. I almost missed him. The fluorescent lights above cast such a dim, flat glow over everything that faces blurred, but not his. Something in me knew the tilt of that jaw, the casual arrogance of his stance. That smirk that always tried to look apologetic but never made it past smug. I froze. Sydney was at the front, mic in hand, introducing one of our guest speakers, a financial counselor from Phoenix who specialized in post-divorce budgeting. She hadn't noticed him yet. I turned away before he saw me, ducked into the hallway, heart racing like it had back when the bank called and asked if I'd approved a $190,000 wire transfer. How, why now? Who told him where we were? I pulled out my phone and texted Sydney. "He's here, back row, wearing navy." There was a pause, then 3 blinking dots. Then, "Jags." "Yes, don't look yet." But she did. I saw her eyes flick to the back, barely a blink, then back to the audience. She didn't flinch, didn't stutter, just kept talking. When the speaker took over, I slipped back inside and made my way toward her. "What do you want to do?" I whispered when we met near the folding chairs. "Nothing," she said calmly. "Let him see me, let him see this." Her voice was steady, her hands weren't. I slid my arm around her waist just briefly, like we used to when we were kids and too scared to walk into the basement alone. She stood taller. The session ended 40 minutes later. People milled about, hugging, exchanging numbers, dropping donation envelopes into the box by the door. Jax lingered. He waited until most of the crowd had dispersed before he walked toward us. Sydney didn't move. He stopped a few feet away, hands in his pockets, eyes scanning her face like he was looking for old wounds to poke. "You look different," he said. Sydney's voice was even. "You don't." He glanced at me, still playing bodyguard Marissa. "Still playing con artist," I shot back. He smiled faintly. "I came to apologize." Sydney tilted her head. "For which part? The gaslighting, the fake business loans, or the way you called me unstable and then weaponized every secret I ever gave you?" He flinched. "Good. I deserved that," he said, "but I'm clean now, working steady, seeing someone just thought you'd want to know." Sydney nodded slowly. "I hope she has a firewall around her checking account." "Come on, Sid." "No," she said firmly. "You don't get to come on me anymore. You don't get to re-enter through the side door of guilt." He sighed, looking suddenly older. I really am sorry, he said. I ruined a lot of things. She didn't respond for a moment. Then she said, you didn't ruin me. And that's when I saw it, not in her face but in his. The realization that she was out of his orbit now, that she'd stopped spinning around his gravity a long time ago. He left without another word. After he was gone, she sat down on the edge of the stage, exhaled so deeply her shoulders deflated. I thought I'd shake, she said, but I didn't. I sat beside her. That's because you're not that girl anymore. I kind of miss her, she whispered. Even if she was a mess, she loved hard. She still does, but now she loves herself too. She smiled at that, a real one, tired but bright. That night she made a new journal entry. Credit, saw the ghost, didn't run, didn't flinch, I'm not his anymore, I'm mine. We closed the trust table early the next day, not out of fear but ceremony. We took the afternoon off, got milkshakes, sat on a park bench watching ducks fight over breadcrumbs. Sydney looked at me and said, I never said thank you. You've said it 100 times. No, I said sorry 100 times. I never said thank you for freezing my accounts. I blinked, caught off guard. You thank me for that. She nodded. You didn't just stop me from spending money, you stopped me from spending myself. And that was the moment I realized the freeze had never been about punishment. It had been about pause. About buying time. About giving us the breath to learn how to exist again, apart, together, and whole. Thanksgiving came early that year, both literally and emotionally. Sydney and I had hosted a small pre-holiday dinner at our apartment for the remaining members of our fractured family. It was an idea Sydney proposed one afternoon with hesitant hope, like a child offering a paper crane, delicate and full of effort. Aunt Jen, Uncle Ruddy, and maybe Camille, she said, listing names like test balloons. I hesitated. Aunt Jen was our late mother's sister, sharp-tongued, overprotective, and fiercely skeptical of Sydney since the trust fallout. Uncle Ruddy was the opposite, soft-spoken, the kind of man who bought 2 turkeys every Thanksgiving just to donate one. And Camille, well, she was complicated, our cousin, a social worker, once my confidant until she took sides. Still, I agreed. Maybe enough time had passed. Maybe not. We decorated the apartment like amateurs, string lights too tangled, the centerpiece off-center. But the warmth, that was real. Sydney made cranberry relish from scratch. I carved the turkey with a knife we hadn't used since Dad died. They arrived one by one, tension riding shotgun. Aunt Jen came bearing a pumpkin pie and a face like she'd bitten into salt. Camille offered awkward hugs and overcompensated with salad. Uncle Ruddy grinned and declared, no better way to face ghosts than with gravy. We sat around the table, plates full, conversation sparse. Until Sydney stood up with a toast. Her hand trembled around the stem of her wine glass. I know I'm the last person who should ask for your ears, she began, but I need to say something. Not as an apology, you've had enough of those from me, but as an inventory, an accounting of sorts. Everyone went still. I spent money I didn't earn, she said. I lied. I let someone manipulate me and didn't stop him when he hollowed out a piece of what Dad left behind. Aunt Jen's lips thinned. Sydney looked right at her. You were right to be angry. I was reckless. And for a long time I thought that recklessness was who I was. She looked at me. But someone believed I could be more, so she froze my accounts, and in doing that she saved my life. I swallowed hard. Sydney turned back to the table. Now I'm asking for something else. A second vote, not for control or money, but for inclusion, for presence. She reached into a small box beside her and pulled out handmade envelopes. Each labeled, one voice, one vote, one trust. Inside each was a summary of our new initiative, the trust table, our financial transparency guidelines, her recovery milestones. We're asking for a symbolic vote, I explained. Whether or not you believe Sydney should retain her seat as co-beneficiary of the Greer Family Trust. Aunt Jen bristled. You want us to decide that? Sydney nodded, because it never really was just a legal thing, it was a legacy thing, and I broke that legacy. Camille opened her envelope first. She read it silently, then glanced at Sydney. I see your name in headlines sometimes, she said. The nonprofit newsletter I always scroll past because it hurt too much to hope again. Sydney looked down. But lately I stopped scrolling, I read, I listen. She held up her envelope. My vote's yes. Sydney's eyes fluttered. Uncle Ruddy followed, lifting his wine glass. Only a fool counts out a Greer woman twice, yes. Then it was Aunt Jen. She opened her envelope with surgical precision, read every word, twice. Then set it down. I still don't trust you, she said. Sydney nodded. I don't expect you to. But I trust Marissa, and if she's still in, I'd be a damn fool to be out. She slid the envelope to the center of the table. Yes. Sydney blinked fast. She looked at me. You haven't voted yet, she whispered. I reached for my own envelope even though I didn't need it. We both knew where I stood. But I opened it anyway. Looked her in the eyes. And said yes now and always. The room didn't erupt, it didn't need to. It settled. Like the exhale after holding a breath you didn't know you'd been carrying since the day you watched everything collapse. We finished dinner with laughter. Not forced. Not nostalgic. Just real. Before they left, Aunt Jen pulled me aside in the kitchen. Don't ever forget what it cost you, she said, this kind of mercy. I won't, I replied, but I also won't forget what it gave me. Later that night, Sydney sat beside me on the couch, legs curled under her, voice quiet. I feel like I finally came home. You did, I said. And we clinked glasses, not in celebration but in solidarity. In survival. In choosing, again and again, to love someone not because they stayed perfect, but because they never stopped trying to become whole. The freeze officially lifted on a Tuesday. Not a dramatic one, no gavel slam, no fireworks. Just a short email from Logan, all terms satisfied, account access re-enabled as of noon. Sydney was already awake when I got the message, curled on the balcony wrapped in a blanket with a steaming mug of green tea. She, grown to love those early hours, a ritual she used to dread, now sacred. Her journal was open in her lap, pen paused mid-word. I stepped outside, phone in hand. It's done. She didn't say anything. Just nodded and closed the journal. I don't know how to feel, she whispered. You don't have to feel anything right away. She looked at me, her expression impossibly full. For the first time in years, I have access to money I don't need. That scares me more than it excites me. That means you're ready. We didn't rush anything that day, no celebratory shopping spree, no withdrawal. Sydney spent the afternoon with a financial coach from the Trust Table's advisory board, going over her revised 5-year plan. I made lemon bars and finally replaced the burnt-out bulb in the hallway, small things that for years had waited behind chaos. By evening, she had transferred $1,000 to a prepaid debit card and left the rest untouched. Training wheels, she joked. We both knew it was more than that. It was restraint born of transformation. The next few weeks passed like a calm season, one we'd never had before. Sydney moved into a small one-bedroom across town, close enough to visit, far enough to stand on her own. She kept the lease modest, the furniture simple. She even named her new Wi-Fi network Frozen No More. She still came over every Thursday night. We called it Ledger Night, even though the journal had long since closed. Instead, we'd eat, talk, rewatch old episodes of The West Wing, and catch each other up on life outside the storm. One evening I asked, do you ever miss it, the thrill? She thought for a long time. I miss the distraction, she said, but not the cost. Then she added, I used to think money gave me power, now I think discipline does. Her words stayed with me. So did her presence. When our mother's estate finalized earlier that summer, a few late insurance claims and bonds finally processed, Sydney and I were each granted a final disbursement, $42,000. The paperwork arrived in a stiff white envelope. Sydney held it like a relic. Do I cash it? She asked. That's up to you. She didn't touch it for a week. Then one morning she drove out to Roseville. She didn't tell me she was going, I only found out when I came home to a small box on my dining table. Inside, our mother's locket. The one Sydney had pawned 3 years ago for less than it was worth. The one I thought we'd never see again. It was polished, restored, beautiful. Tucked beneath it was a note. Some things aren't meant to stay lost. Thank you for holding space until I found myself again. S. I wore that locket the next day. And every day after. The trust table expanded. We partnered with 3 more community centers, added a virtual curriculum, received another grant. Sydney took over as co-director, something I never imagined when all of this began. She was brilliant, fierce, honest. Her story didn't just help women. It saved them. One night, months later, we stood in front of a packed auditorium. Sydney had just delivered the keynote speech at a conference on financial trauma recovery. The room gave her a standing ovation. As the crowd filed out, she leaned over and whispered, "This isn't the end, is it?" I shook my head. "No," I said, "it's the part where the credits roll but the story keeps going." She laughed. "God, I love a good sequel." I turned to her, heart full. "You earned this, Sid." And she smiled, not the practiced, performative one, but the one I remembered from when we were kids, building pillow forts and pretending we were queens of something that couldn't be stolen. In that moment, I saw not just my sister. I saw a woman who had once burned everything down, and then, against all odds, learned how to build a home out of the ashes. She had been frozen. But now, she was free.